And our thanks to John and Nate's full list of projections just posted at 538.com. Let's get the roundtable's reaction. Oklahoma Republican Congressman Tom Cole, Minnesota Democratic Congressman Keith Ellison, Dan Senor, co-founder of the Foreign Policy Initiative, and our own Roberts. Does anyone disagree with Nate Silver?
I disagree.
Oh,
what a surprise.
What a surprise.
Yeah, well, first of all, this is a snapshot in time. And, if Democrats are watching this broadcast, then they need to get out on the street and start knocking some doors. I think this is going to motivate our base to really get out there and make relationships and show people that this is the folks who shut down the government. These are the folks responsible for sequester. These are the people who don't want to extend unemployment insurance. Even 10,000 people in Oklahoma have seen...
I'm glad you're so conservative.
Well, 22,000 in Minnesota have not got their unemployment insurance. This is who's responsible for that. And if you want to see more of that bad stuff, then stay at home. If not, you better get out there.
Is he dreaming?
Yeah, he is, actually. and which is often the case with my friend.
Hey, you got a dream big, Tom.
And that's a very big dream on your part.
It is good.
But look, I think you look for some obvious signs. The playing field here has been getting bigger rather than smaller for Republicans for months now. Places that aren't normally in play are coming into play. Most of the places that Silver ticked off are red states that the president lost badly in the last election. And finally, we've got a bellwether special election out there with Florida 13, which I think showed a lot about what the state of play is. Well, this is a district that the president cares about.
Seems like there's a formula, too, right?
But they are both right. I mean, what we're seeing in our latest ABC poll is that in the 34 states where there are Senate elections up, the Republicans are up by 12 points in those 34 states. So what's the likelihood? The likelihood is the Republicans take the Senate. There is one Republican seat in play, which is Georgia. But the fact is that that there are a lot of things that have to happen, and one of them is Republican primaries have to come out the way Republicans want. And now some states they can nominate yahoos and the yahoo will win, but other states if they nominate yahoos, the Democrats likely to win. So they have to be.
You got that formula?
I would say that this is a fundamental difference from 2010 to 2012.
No, I know, because everybody understands that you don't
candidate
want to
recruitment has been excellent. You look at people like Tom Cotton in Arkansas, Dan Sullivan in Alaska. You just go across the spectrum. Right. In Colorado, we had a crazy right-winger who would have lost the general election. He's gotten out. Suddenly, Cory Gardner, a guy who can actually win this thing, has gotten in.
I agree. You've done a much better job.
And the insurgent groups on the right are being far more strategic. The Club for Growth, the other groups are not going after candidates. They're not actually backing candidates because they can lose general elections.
Where Keith was right was that if the Democrats, and it's an enormous if the Democrats get out their vote, which they don't do normally in off years, then they could win. But that's a big...
The president's approval rating in these states is in the low 40s. No. These Senate Democrat incumbents are going to have to outperform the president's numbers by double digits. These are states that Mitt Romney won by 10 or 20 points.
Let me talk about what if the Republicans do take the Senate. What really happens? Will there be big changes? What if Ruth Bader Ginsburg retires? Can they overturn Obamacare?
Well, the president needs to decide then, does he want to spend his last 2 years in foreign travel, or does he want to seriously negotiate with the Congress of the United States? I think that's when you have an opening for some really big things that take Republican votes for the most part, but also take a Democratic signature, somewhat similar to what we had with Bill Clinton. Clinton, we got welfare reform, balanced budget. Most Democrats didn't vote for those things, but you had Republicans that pushed them through and a willing negotiating partner on the other side. If the president will do that, then I think we can actually come to grips with entitlement reform, find some common ground on some infrastructure, maybe get some tax reform. But I don't think that's going to happen with a Democratic Senate.
You mentioned the president and foreign travel. Not really a great week for the president in terms of a face-off with Vladimir Putin. We loved this from The Onion, the satirical website, penning a humorous op-ed with Putin saying it's certainly easy task to forcefully annex an entire province against another country's will. So I just wanted to thank you, the government of the United States, the nations of Western Europe, and really the entire world population as a whole for being super cool about all of this. Now, The Onion is not alone. Congressman Ellison, is Putin getting away with murder because the world really lacks the challenge? Really lacks the force?
Well, think about the options on the table. I don't think it's appropriate to steam through the Black Sea and get into World War III, perhaps. So what is the president doing? He's sanctioning leaders in Russia. He is condemning this in the strongest terms. He's mobilizing Western forces to make sure that this is condemned and stopped. And of course, no doubt about it, NATO is getting mobilized and understands that this is a high stakes thing. I mean, a few years ago when we saw action in Georgia and the Caucasus, I mean, what did George Bush do? The president is doing what it's responsible to do. And, sort of
But meanwhile, we've got all these troops on the border.
Well, exactly. And you had the foreign minister just say to you on this program that the likelihood of war was very high last week and even higher this week. That withdrawal from the base in Crimea was Fort Sumter. You know, it really was. And so that was the beginning of civil war. Now we go to civil war in Ukraine. Then what does the United States do?
There are basic things we can do. Provide small arms and ammunition to the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian government, which they're asking for, which the president hasn't provided. This administration has just provided MREs to the Ukrainians. And I actually don't think they've delivered them yet.
That military is so small compared to Russia.
Missile defense capabilities in former Warsaw Pact countries that are part of NATO. Provide resources to former military resources, ground forces movements for former Warsaw Pact countries that are part of NATO. Expand the sanctions. The Magnitsky Act has hundreds of Russians we can be sanctioning. The administration is sanctioning a handful of them.
I'm not saying that you are wrong. What I'm saying is that this Republican attacking the president, suggesting that he's weak, is absolutely counterproductive, and that if we want to look...
This is not a Republican-Democrat thing. There are Democrats. There are Democrats who share my position.
No, I agree, but I think the president needs to get the support of this country and move forward together with
Republicans don't write the onion. I mean, you know, look, this has been an administration from the reset to the cancellation of the agreements that we had with Poland and the Czech Republic on missile defense to Syria that frankly has been outthought and outmaneuvered pretty consistently by Putin. And I think that's why we're here. And I agree that there are limits to what he can do. Nobody's talking about putting troops on the ground. But I think you really want to catch their attention. I'd go back to something Dan said. You reopen negotiations with the Poles and the Czechs about anti-ballistic missile defense. That's the one card I think we have to play that really wakes them up in Moscow.
And just quickly on the Republican Party, this has really sort of split the Republican Party.
Yes. Well, I think that the Republican Party, there has been this debate about whether or not the Republican Party is shifting to some sort of quasi-isolationism, debate over the NSA, debate over drones, debate over Syria. What's striking about Putin is there's been like a correction. Whereas Rand Paul was initially quite critical of Republicans who were going back to Cold War rhetoric, and then you watch where the party went. You watch where Ted Cruz went. He's a good bellwether for where the base is. He was extremely critical of the president on Russia and Ukraine, and suddenly Rand Paul has moved to a more muscular position. So I actually think this whole notion that neo-isolationist politics on the right is paralyzing the right's foreign policy is overstated.
Well, because once you start taking over parts of countries, it changes the whole equation.
It certainly does. Coming up, the political firestorm over Obamacare and contraception heads to the Supreme Court, and later we talk to Mr. Jason Bourne himself, Matt Damon. But first, our powerhouse puzzler. We all saw those photos of Hillary Clinton from 1969 on Life.com this week. So here's the question. In 1994, the First Lady reportedly told her close friend Diane Blair she might pursue what non-political profession after leaving the White House. Back in 2 minutes to see if the roundtable and you can guess the answer.
This week with George Stephanopoulos.
Okay, the question. Long ago, Hillary Clinton reportedly said she might pursue what profession after leaving the White House? I'm going to start with the members of Congress who I'm sure have it right.
Community organizer. Worked for President Obama.
Doctor?
Doctor.
For healthcare?
Yes.
Motivational speaker for Goldman Sachs Trading. Which is effectively what she's been doing now.
Teaching. Aha! Guess who wins? The answer is teaching. Her close friend Diane Blair wrote in her diary that Hillary considered becoming a kindergarten teacher after leaving the White House. And, by the way, she's still keeping her options open. When asked just last night whether she will run in 2016, Hillary said, quote, "I'm obviously thinking about all kinds of decisions." Up next, the Supreme Court takes on Obamacare again. Emotions over Obamacare still high as the sign-up deadline approaches, and now the law is heading to the Supreme Court again. This week, the roundtable weighs in after ABC's Jeff Zeleny.
Hobby Lobby sells arts and crafts at more than 500 locations across America, but not on Sundays, so employees can spend time for family and worship. It's the Christian beliefs of David Green and his Oklahoma family who founded Hobby Lobby 4 decades ago. They're now at the center of a Supreme Court fight over the nation's healthcare law. Should for-profit corporations be required to provide insurance coverage for morning-after pills and other kinds of contraception? The Greens say no, it violates their religious views.
My convictions enter into how we run our business.
But supporters of the law say only people, not companies like Hobby Lobby, can hold religious beliefs.
Corporations can't pray, they don't express devotion to a god.
It's the biggest challenge to the healthcare law since the court upheld a key provision in 2012. A critical moment for the law with an enrollment deadline on March 31st. The White House, hoping a legal victory, brings political relief for a law still as controversial as ever. For This Week, Jeff Zeleny, ABC News, Laurel, Maryland.
Thanks to Jeff, and back now with the roundtable. And I want to ask you, Dan, first, what's your instinct on this?
I think the administration's case is very weak, and I think it has enormous political implications. If Hobby Lobby has to chooses to avoid providing these coverage for these 4 contraceptives out of the 20 that they're required to, they will get fines of about $500 million a year. This is a company that employs 13,000 Americans. Plus, at a time when there's been tens of millions of Americans have been exempted. So all the selective implementation of Obamacare combined with huge fines for businesses that are actually employing Americans, I think is terrible for the overall debate over Obamacare. It continues to drive down popularity.
Congressman Ellison.
You know, let's step back from the whole Obamacare, Affordable Care Act debate and ask ourselves what this would mean. Do we really want a corporation to be able to have its own religious views and impose them on its employees? What would that mean for the separation of church and state, for individual liberty? What would it mean about corporate personhood? This is scary territory, and people need to win.
Congressman.
Look, I know the Green family. I know the company very well. They're absolutely outstanding people, and they live their beliefs. And this is about the free exercise of religious beliefs in your business. They follow these precepts in terms of opening their businesses or not opening them on Sunday and that sort of thing. So I go back, I think Dan makes a very good point. At the end of the day, we've already exempted millions and millions of people. We exempt religious institutions. This is a privately held corporation, by the way. And in this case, I think they've got a very strong argument. They won at the district level. Win the Supreme Court.
I want to make a turn here to Cokie, and I don't want you to answer the question about Obamacare here. This week, with the plane missing, we all thought of you and your family. 1972, your father, Congressman Hale Boggs, disappeared in a plane crash and was never found. I just have to ask you what it's been like for you watching these last few weeks.
It's very hard, obviously, and my heart just goes out to those families. I think they should probably expect never to see their loved ones again, and that plane is probably at the bottom of the sea. There was a 39-day search for my father's plane, and it was the biggest search in American history. It rewrote the map of Alaska, and so I think that this is just where it's likely to go.
It did some good, mandated emergency locator transmitters on airplanes, though, Cokie, and that's a good thing. Thanks to you all. We'll be back right away.